You're listening to an IOE podcast.
Powered by UCL Minds.
This is Academia et al., the podcast for anyone and everyone figuring out life in academia.
You're listening to Academia et al., the podcast for early career academics by early career academics. I'm Keri, an associate professor in developmental psychology at IOE, UCL's Faculty of Education and Society.
And I'm Alina. I'm a senior research fellow in demography, also at UCL IOE. We're the co-hosts for this podcast, and like you, we're early career academics just trying to figure it all out. Moving away from Season's 2 theme of academic levers, we'd like to bring back the focus on academia in Season 3 of Academia et al. This season will focus on the practical and relevant skills for young professionals. Whether you're still completing your PhD or consider yourself an early career academic, we want to help you maximize your employability for any career. We will answer questions like, how do I build a strong academic CV? How do I stand out from the crowd? Where do I start looking for jobs and how do I prepare for job interviews? What is impact and how do I talk to journalists? All of these and much more is coming up next in Season 3 of Academia et al.
In this episode, we are thrilled to be chatting with a special guest and friend about a really timely topic that is academic skills. Do I have what it takes to keep up with the times? What would you do if you could start your PhD all over again? And with the rise of AI usage in everyday life in academia, many listeners may be wondering, what is the value of traditional academic skill set? And how can we navigate the new challenges in teaching today's generation of students?
So today, we're going to talk about PhD experiences, how to maximize this unique time, and what should we learn? How do I build a strong academic CV, and how to stand out from the crowd? Joining us in today's conversation is the lovely Jenny Chanfreau. Dr. Jenny Chanfreau is a lecturer in sociology at University of Sussex. Jenny's journey into academia is a reminder that early career academic doesn't always mean young professional. These are Jenny's words, not mine. She spent 7 years as a social researcher before starting her PhD in gender studies at the London School of Economics. After completing her doctoral research in 2019, she joined the Centre for Longitudinal Studies in the UCL Social Research Institute as a research fellow in demography, before taking up a lectureship at Sussex at the beginning of this academic year. She's also the co-founder of FemQuant, which is a network of feminist quantitative social science researchers. Welcome to the podcast, Jenny.
It's a pleasure to be here chatting to you both today. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. And so, Jenny, first of all, huge congratulations on your recent appointment as a lecturer in sociology at the University of Sussex. Well done. I'm super proud of you.
Thank you.
You have certainly been missed at UCL. And from my time of knowing you, Jenny, I know that you've had a fascinating academic journey getting to where you got to today. I know you spent some time at NatCen. So for our listeners, NatCen is the common short name for the National Center for Social Research. So can you tell us a little bit about how and why you decided to apply for a PhD at the London School of Economics after years of working at this charity?
So the decision came about sort of a little bit on a whim. There was a combination of push and pull factors, I suppose. NatCen had gone through some restructuring at the time, so I guess that was a bit of a push factor. Some of my colleagues had left, and I was starting to think about what else might be out there. And the pull factor was academic research within academia allows you, I guess, a bit more academic freedom and to be explicitly political in your research and how you communicate your research. So that was a bit of a pull factor. I would say that in hindsight, all is well that ends well. But I know that during the time of the PhD, for probably most of it, I did question my sanity quite a few times with that decision to, jump off a permanent contract. I had a pension and just decide to chuck it all in, jump off a cliff and hope that I learned to fly before I hit the ground.
Well, thank you for sharing. I hope no regrets. You sound as no regrets.
No, not anymore.
Okay, coming back to more practical questions. Many PhD students come into studies soon after finishing their postgraduate degrees, and many struggle at the beginning to organize their time, often spending ages trying to figure out how academia works. Do you remember finding this challenging after switching from a world of clear tasks and deadlines? And whether you could share any practical tips for our listeners?
I did find the transition quite challenging. Yes, I found academia quite opaque and sort of as a hidden curriculum that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out. I felt like academia was a bit of a bubble and I wasn't sure if what I'd done previously had value, that it sort of counted within academia. And I didn't feel like a student. I felt like what I was doing day to day on the PhD was very similar to what I had done previously in terms of analysis and writing and things. And it didn't, apart from not having salary, I didn't feel like a student. So, in terms of tips, I would say treat the PhD as a one-person research project. Think about the project management skills that you need to sort of keep your PhD on track. And then secondly, aim for a balance. So a PhD hopefully shouldn't be your whole identity. If you can, treat it like a full-time job. So, take weekends, take evenings, balance in terms of both time. So, obviously, pace yourself. It is a marathon, not a sprint. So, in the UK context, it'll probably take around 3 to 4 years. It might take a bit longer, it might take a bit shorter, but you can't be going at full speed for that whole time because there will be crunch points where you have deadlines, where you have to step up. And if you're already at full speed, you've got nothing else to step up to. And that also means taking breaks. So taking leave. I had a family while I was doing my PhD, and they certainly expected me to log off, put the computer away while we're on holiday. So that helped me. And with the balance as well, I mentioned my family. Having a social context, I think, really helps as well, so that the PhD isn't defining all of you, all of your life, if you like.
That's really great, and lots of what you said definitely resonates. And I really like that imagery of it's a marathon, not a sprint, because oftentimes when you're stuck in that PhD mode, you feel like, oh, I have to keep doing stuff, keep going. Can't have weekends. What sleep? What? So I think it's very important to remember that, and as a psychologist, that's a super good tip. And so, before I share a little bit about how that experience was like for me too, Alina, I'm really curious to know how it was for you, your early days as a PhD student. How did you manage your time?
I think it definitely resonates with a lot of what Jenny said. I did not come from the world of work before, so I came straight through doing multiple masters, and the only thing I knew in life how to do is to study. And I think that brought a lot of responsibility of trying to, not to say responsibility, but challenge of how to draw the line, how to treat it as a job, how to count hours if needs be, not to get overwhelmed with reading. And also, I moved to the UK without prior experience of living in the UK, and my PhD was about the transition to adulthood in the UK. So I took it very serious upon me to read about the social context, to talk to people, to ask them whether what I want to do actually makes sense. I also had a lot of housemates from various parts of the UK. So I remember while I was finding something in my PhD, I was like, does that sound okay to you? Like, does that sound like what you people do? And they were like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. That sounds like my brothers, sisters. So I think for anyone who experienced something similar, it is a big challenge, but you should be easy on yourself, even though it doesn't feel that way. And I think exactly this balance of taking weekends off, even when you don't feel like you've done much progress. I think the first 3 months is the time when you feel, what am I even doing? What are they paying me for? Are they just paying me to read books? Amazing. But that can take a toll on you, thinking that you are, it triggers immediately an imposter syndrome. What am I doing here? What am I getting paid for? Are they going to ask for this money back? So I think that's something that has been, going through my head in the early months. And I wish that someone would tell me it's going to go and it's going to get easier. I did try to sign up for as many early career networks and socials and go and talk to other people. What are their experiences and how they came about to the world of PhD? And I think it was fascinating to find that so many people were unlike me, not just going straight through their studies into academia, into PhD. And so they shared this wisdom of try, not to take it personal, very Brené Brown stuff, but it does get personal. Well, that's about me. And Keri, any words of wisdom from your early days and how you overcame all of those hurdles?
Too many hurdles to identify, but something that, maybe is similar to Alina, your experience. Again, like you, I started a PhD not having even lived in the UK at all. So I was kind of thrown into the, little town of Cambridge. And, I certainly knew before embarking on a PhD, I really wanted to do this. This was something, I'm passionate about. The topic is great. I worked on understanding children and how they develop trust in others and then also their mental health. So through the PhD, I actually got to learn a bit more about the UK culture. I was visiting schools, I was venturing out, of the little town. And that was really the only time I got to see outside of campus. And that was my experience of the UK in schools and on buses, waiting in fields for a long time, trying to get to this one school and do this testing with children. And I think for me, a large part of my PhD felt like a really lonely process. You had to keep yourself accountable, you had to set your own deadlines. And I would say maybe before doing the PhD, I thought I was pretty good at that, setting my own deadlines and meeting it. But certainly, I think during the PhD, when you're amidst it all, time can be such a kind of illusory kind of construct because your weekends and weekdays just blend into one. You're not sleeping well. I remember just being on lots of, caffeinated drinks and everyone else seemed to be doing fine and well. So certainly I remember my mental health also, struggling a little bit whilst I was doing the PhD and reminding yourself that actually as a psychologist, you should care about your health and this should be a priority and the PhD will still be there even after you fix everything else. So I think it became this kind of changing of a mindset at some point that this PhD, as Jenny said, is a marathon, not a sprint, that you need to really think that this is a process for you to figure out whether academia is even for you. And I think as soon as I saw it like that and knowing that not everyone after a PhD will stay in academia, I think was helpful to enjoy the process a little bit more and to figure out, is this really for me? There's still time to figure it out, even if I don't know exactly where I want to be after the PhD, which perhaps many PhD students at the moment are thinking about that, trying to figure out what that next thing is. So yeah, I think that was how it was for me, and certainly not an easy journey.
Thank you both for sharing. And to be honest, I wish I'd known that. And I've heard this episode when I was in my early PhD days. And if we talk about the early PhD days, and if you're listening to us from abroad, you might not know that in the UK, PhD students have kind of a strange status in the department. They are sort of part of the department, but not really considered as staff members, which might lead to feeling isolated, what Keri just talked about from time to time, unless one takes a proactive approach. Jenny, do you share my sentiment, or was your experience different?
Yeah, in terms of the strange status in the department, I think that's spot on. In some ways, I think student is a bit of a misnomer for PhD. I personally prefer the term doctoral researcher. In fact, a lot of doctoral researchers actually do paid work within the department that they're associated with as postgraduate teaching assistants at some point during the PhD journey. Not everyone, of course, but often as PhD researchers, they're not invited to departmental meetings, for example. So they're not sort of integrated into the running of the department, even as they may be contributing to the delivery of some of the department's teaching. Now, the department I was at doing my PhD actually did a lot of things really well in terms of that integration process. So there were really regular sort of departmental seminars and public lectures with an expectation that both faculty and PhD researchers attend those. They were open to students as well, master's students as well, but the expectation was there for both faculty and PhDs. I remember that feeling quite awkward at the time because they were quite late in the afternoon, early evening, not the greatest when you've got kids to, get to bed, etc. But actually, the fact that the expectation was there helped me integrate into the department. The other thing was that the department fiercely protected the dedicated office space for PhD researchers within the department, even as the institution was trying to sort of say, well, you've got this massive office here, we should allocate it to paid faculty. No, the PhD researchers need that space, and the social space, the sort of shared common space in the department was also shared. There was no hierarchy there. It was shared between students, faculty, and PhDs. So a lot of good things that departments can do, even with that strange sort of status in the UK.
Thank you. I think I would agree entirely with what you said. And thank you for sharing all those tips about teaching and attending all the seminars and doing as much possible to get noticed. Anything else that comes to mind in terms of trying to get visible, trying to get a voice?
I think internally within the department, obviously, use the space that is available, show up, attend research seminars, socials, etc. Beyond the department, or maybe even beyond the institution, the university that you're at, there's a whole list of things that you can do. And I think that list is probably almost endless if you just type in, build your brand as a doctoral researcher into a search engine. I'm sure you can generate a massive long list, but I'd say don't try and do everything. Pick what suits you and follow the calling, if you like. If something feels important or worthwhile to you, even if it's not on a list of strategic things to do during your PhD, and even if at the time the career value might not be obvious to you as you're starting, it might turn out to. So if it feels important, if it feels worthwhile, lean into that, do it, and see if you can make that part of your academic profile. Because if it's not on one of those lists that everyone can see, then it'll make you stand out from the crowd.
That's a great tip. And I think this moves on nicely to my next question, which is more about the academic community and the social aspects. And Jenny, I know in your PhD days, together with a few other students, you founded FemQuant, so this network for researchers using feminist approaches to quantitative social sciences. So listeners, if you've never heard of it, check out their webpage. It'll be in our show notes. It's super cool. Tell me a bit more about how you came up with that, and where did you and so many other like-minded people set it up?
Yeah, so actually it came about, I think it was at the end of my first year as PhD researcher. I went on a methods summer school and I met Rose Cook there, who was a PhD student at another university at UCL, so I was at LSE. And we got talking about the challenges of sort of our aspirations to do feminist research using quantitative data, and we sort of talked about how great it was to have met someone who was struggling with the same thing and wished that there would be a conference that we could attend to learn more about it and chat to others like us. But isn't it a shame that one of those things doesn't exist. And eventually it dawned on us that if it didn't exist, we had to organize it. So about a year later, we had got as far as putting on a one-day event. And by the time the event actually came around, we had realized that we wanted this conversation to continue and to have it with more like-minded people. So on the day, we actually said, if anyone's interested in doing more of this sort of stuff, then get in touch. And that's how the network really was formed. So after that first one-day event, Sarah, who was just finishing her PhD in Canada, and Heini Väisänen, who was at the time an early career researcher or lecturer already, they joined the Organising Collective, and that's when we really kicked off the network. So it's quite niche, feminist research and quantitative methods. Most people are like, does that even combine? The network's still ongoing, and my main motivation for FemQuant and for wanting it to continue is still to have that space to learn from others, come together and have conversations. And I'm heartened by what Sarah Ahmed said in Living a Feminist Life, that to become a feminist is to stay a student. That really resonates with me when I'm thinking about these challenges with doing feminist research with quant data.
That's amazing. And I can see, Jenny, that you wasted no time and started the network right then and there, which sounds like a, really good characteristic of a PhD student who wants to make change and to get on with it, to have, that idea of if it doesn't exist, you start it. You can be the one leading it. And pretty similar to kind of our early career network a lot of times, and even this podcast a little bit, giving voice to early career academics is sort of founded on that notion too. So kudos to starting things and just going with the flow. And how about you, Alina? Before, during your PhD days, did you have similar experience as well?
Well, it's somewhat similar, but of course, hats off to Jenny and the other PhD students for finding a network. Yeah, for getting started with a network. I think this is the most you can do. If it doesn't exist and you create an international scholarship, that's kind of hard to beat. So my achievements were not as grand, but I very quickly realized that there isn't enough room for conversation, mostly for me, to talk to other demographers. So I am a demographer and I was trained in demography. And before taking up my PhD in Liverpool, I did the European Doctoral School in Demography, and before studied in Germany, specifically in demography. And I thought like, oh, I'm always surrounded by demographers. And then the reality hit me. I started my PhD in the Department of Geography, something that I never thought is humanly possible. And then I had to learn that demography and social sciences, very often in the UK, sit within the Department of Geography and counts somewhere in between human geography and sociology, and or social policy, or gender studies, like in the case of LSE sometimes. So it was a huge revelation that, wow, okay, I'm not going to be talking to demographers all the time anymore. So how can I change that? I went to all possible free events, especially the ones that offered accommodation or travel or lunches. So any kind of meetings and one-day meeting conferences. And one of my very first conferences was the British Society for Population Studies, which is now my favorite conference. I think I've been about 9 times since my very first year of PhD. And I very soon realized that I was actually asked whether I would be interested in applying to be a student rep and sit on the council with some other senior academics and professors. And I was very flattered, very scared, but I thought I have to go for it because otherwise I will not know other PhD students in the country. I will not know who is what, who is who, and in which university they sit. So I applied for it, and I sat on the panel for 2 years, and I helped organizing conference, and I organized various events for early career academics with the help of people from the council and different professors. So I got to know my crowds in the country context, and I think that was hugely beneficial. Well, and also it did make me stand out from the crowd, and people did know me and did get to know about me or read about me in the newsletter. There was always my photo as the student rep, which I'm sure helped me in life just to get noticed and to have people having people heard my name or seen my face before. Carrie, how about you? Anything similar?
Yeah, I guess I'm starting to see a pattern between the three of us that we're, go-getters and starters. But again, my probably small accomplishment as a PhD student is not on any of the scale of your national or even specialty level. But when I was a PhD student, I think selfishly I enjoyed very much meeting academics or other PhD students from different disciplines. So through kind of conversations at meal times and social events, the thing that really I enjoyed the most, I would say, were these conversations like the both of you. And because I couldn't find a space where these multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary conversations could have within college in a more formal setting, and I found it really difficult to kind of want to know everyone and kind of know what they're doing all at the same time. Me and another friend at the time, our flatmate, actually, we were flatmates. We decided to put on a conference. We just called it a multidisciplinary conference. It was for PhD students and also the fellows of the college and lecturers. We thought it was important to have the kind of academics at the next stage join our sessions and give us advice, so to speak. And so that kind of multidisciplinary conference really was helpful in drawing out the themes or common themes and research questions that we were all trying to answer, but using different methods, different training as well. And I found that conference to be very helpful for my own thinking, for everyone else as well who was there, because we soon realized that even though we might be working on a similar research question, the types of methods and the process and thinking process we went about doing it and getting there was quite different. And that itself, led to kind of new collaborations between PhD students at our stage, but also understanding what faculty is working on was certainly helpful as well. So I think that's kind of been the running theme of a lot of my other projects since then, now that I think about it, because it involves multidisciplinary collaborations, maybe also individuals from different career stages as well. So yeah, that was something that started as when I was a PhD student.
That sounds great. I really hope that our listeners benefit from hearing about various ways that you can make their PhD more of their PhD, and wherever you're based, start looking for like-minded people, sign up for early career networks, attend socials, volunteer to be a postgraduate rep. The world is your oyster, really. And now on to the next question. So we're gradually moving further along the PhD journey. So let's talk about building your CV and skill sets. Jenny, do you remember what kind of courses you attended during your studies and how you found them?
Yeah, I feel like I attended quite a lot. So the department where I was doing my PhD mandated that first year PhDs audit some of the core courses for master's level. So one was a gender theory course, and the other one was a sort of feminist research and epistemology course. And they were great. I certainly made sure that we were all sort of on the same page, the starting blocks. I also audited a statistics course that was maybe a little bit more advanced than I was working at, but great to have those notes when I actually needed to apply some of those analysis techniques. And then I also audited a feminist demography module taught by my supervisor. And then over the years, I did attend some short courses as well, the summer school that I mentioned on methods, some other short courses on specific methods. And I feel like I was like in sponge mode, attending every early career researcher event at conferences. Sometimes they put on, maybe the day before the proper conference, they put something on specifically for early career researchers. So things like sessions on how to get published, how to do a peer review for a journal, all of those. I signed up for all of them. And I just wanted to end with a point that Alina mentioned about going back to the same conference year after year. And I think that's a really good thing. If you find your people, keep going back as a PhD student, because that's how you get known by the wider community of colleagues, not at your institution, who are roughly working in the same area.
That's a good tip. I certainly have, also conferences that I've been as a PhD student and continue to go back. And that's a great way to make yourself known and your work known. So I guess, thinking about those courses, it sounds like obviously that it was very time consuming. You somehow managed to pack all of that in amidst all the other family things and whatnot. But, for the PhD student today, do you think that would be your kind of suggestion to them as well, that they should be engaging with many courses and skills and training up as well? What are your thoughts, Jenny?
I think every PhD journey is very individual. It depends on your circumstances. So, not only did I attend a lot of courses, I also had to do paid work, and there were other constraints on my time, but somehow I seemed to get lots done in the 4 years. I think it can be really useful to do formal courses, whether they're modules, that you're auditing at the university, or specific short courses. I know that I still go back to some of the foundational readings from the courses that I audited, and I certainly revisit the methods course materials, especially for the courses that provided code. I go back to my notes and I go back to the code. I'm like, oh, I can reuse this and start developing it for my own analysis. So I think it can be useful, but I wouldn't, there's no one size fits all.
I 100% agree with that. And fun fact, actually, for our listeners, Jenny and I actually met during our very first PhD year at the training course in Manchester. And it was a short course on sequence analysis that was running at the Katie Marsh Institute for Social Research. It's a brilliant center that offers a wide range of short courses. So short promotion, please do look it up. It's amazing. Highly recommend. And Jenny and I still use the USB sticks that they gave us. So we occasionally find those colorful, bright purple and bright green USB sticks that the materials were on. So that's also a fun reminder about all the courses that we took together.
I know. And I think as this PhD student, I'm sure you all agree, the free things and the freebies that really make us want to go to the events, but also that's also a way for us to remember what we learned from those sessions as well. But so I guess we're moving through the PhD at lightning speed here. Now say, you're halfway through the PhD, the clock starts ticking. So from just navigating where to begin to finding yourself that you suddenly have very limited funded time or paid time. And, as early career researchers, our contracts are very precarious and limited. When and where does one begin looking for jobs? And importantly, should they start looking before their contract or scholarship ends? Jenny, any thoughts on this?
I'm not sure I have any wisdom to share on what people should do. I found myself wondering as you were speaking just then, what even is halfway through your PhD and the clock starts ticking. I mean, in the UK, a lot of PhD studentships cover 3 years. The university I was at certainly had an institutional model of expecting a sort of 4-year journey. So although I tried to, so I had a 3-year studentship, I very much went in thinking I'm paid for 3 years, so I will finish in 3 years. But that can be really difficult if the sort of structures around you have an expectation that it takes 4 years to finish. So what is halfway? Is halfway 18 months into your 3-year funded period, or is it 2 years in? So in terms of wisdom, I don't know what I can say that people should do, but I can share what I did. So, and I want to acknowledge that I was incredibly lucky as well when it came to securing my first job after the PhD. So a I'd say probably about 6 months before I was due to submit my thesis, I decided to sign up for the job alerts on jobs.ac.uk, not to actively start looking and applying, but just to avoid missing out on something that might be perfect. So a sort of keeping my ear to the ground, but not actively looking yet, period. And I gave myself permission, and I said this out loud to my partner as well. I will not start applying for jobs until after I have submitted the thesis. And we agreed that that was okay. We were going to get through it, even if there ended up being a few months gap between the two. But while I kept my ear to the ground, a job came up that sounded like they were describing me. And I thought, okay, well, I have the skills. I have just literally used the data sets that they are looking for, or that they will be using on this project for my thesis. I have to apply for this. This would be perfect. So that was the one application that I submitted before submitting my thesis. And having just said that it sounded like they described me, and in the job spec, I did land that job. But I think that was luck. That was not like, you can't plan for that.
Cool. And I think that's, lots of great tips in there. And maybe just to follow up then, how about you, Alina?
I probably did something similar to Jenny. I did sign up to jobs.ac.uk. I did not have an active Twitter account during my early PhD days, but I did get myself a Twitter account to start following job ads. And I was surprised how many things I've heard about on Twitter before I even received any notifications from jobs.ac.uk. And some of them I've never seen on jobs.ac.uk. But also, if you're looking outside of the UK, then there is not they very rarely come up on unless someone pays the jobs.ac.uk, or you can get them on ResearchGate now as well. So I think ResearchGate shares job adverts around Europe, definitely. So that can be helpful. I personally went to all of the early career mentoring or breakfast meetings at the conference. So anywhere where you could show up with your questions and ask how to get a job, or to just flag, hey, I'm here, I will be available very soon. If you apply for funding, think about me. Or if you just because a lot of professors or senior academics who get the funding, they are not allowed to say that they got it before the time comes. So it could be that they know that the position will be open in 4 months. They already know it. They're not allowed to officially publish it anywhere, but they can tell you privately that there will be a position opened in 4 months, and they can highly encourage you to apply for one. So that's also something that did happen during one of the conferences. The project wasn't announced yet, but I was made aware that there will be one. I did apply for it. I didn't get it, but it's a learning curve. So it was kind of heads up, there will be a position. And just wanted to mention that UCL and other universities have a lot of different careers offers or sessions on how to build your profile, how to look for jobs, how to prepare for interviews. There will be a special episode where Keri and I will be talking about job interviews and preparation. If you tune in for our future episode, but that's just something I wanted to briefly mention here. Keri, what was your strategy?
I don't think it was a real strategy per se. At least it's not a clean cut one. Came to the end of my PhD thinking, or deciding still whether or not I wanted to stay in academia. So I was certainly thinking, well, looking objectively at my skill set, which of these skills are transferable, how much of this, especially I guess the quantitative side and methodology side of skills, can I feasibly translate into, say, industry jobs. So I was at the time looking also and applying for quite a few jobs in large tech firms that maybe should not mention their names, and also actively applying to postdocs in academia. So I was kind of playing both sides at the minute, coming to the end of a PhD thinking, let's give everything a shot. It was certainly not a strategy because it was very time consuming. And also, I was trying to write up knowing that I, as an international scholar, had visa issues as well. So I literally would have been kicked out of the country right after I had my Viva in the UK. So I really wanted to make sure I had a few maybe applications sent out before I did my Viva. And I would say, for those of you who are at that stage right now, it is quite scary. It's stressful, but as Jenny said, kind of rightly so, looking back, I would probably choose to focus just on finishing the PhD and writing up, making sure that's solid. And then, where possible, I would suggest going for what the US or North American model would suggest, these things called job talks. So, really kind of emailing the labs or PIs that are doing similar work in your area, introducing yourself shamelessly, and asking whether or not you can go give a talk in their labs, for example, if they don't really know your work. I think that's a great way to showcase your research from the PhD and also to meet the people in different labs, different universities. And for me, it was a way of also seeing what that other university might look like and whether that's an environment I can see myself living in for the next, say, 2 to 3 years as a postdoc. So reaching out to those PIs is also very helpful. Chances are they might have projects, as Alina said, coming up, or even know of other people looking for postdocs at the time. That will be super helpful and will at least remember your name and know that you're looking to flag up that opportunity. And finally, in the kind of last year of my PhD, I also knew that if I were to stay in academia, I'd probably need to brush up on teaching skills. So I also joined a course that was held by the Higher Education Academy, which allows PhD students doing supervisions to gain kind of teaching qualifications. And I think having that on my application and my CV when I apply for that lectureship or postdoc in the future was also very helpful as well. So just a heads up that this is a qualification that can help, I guess, identify that you have good teaching skills as well.
That's a very good hint. I didn't do it. I've, to be honest, never even heard about it before I started working at UCL. So have a look at that, whether that's offered at your university for sure. We have time only for 3 more questions in this episode, unfortunately. And we've just discussed that looking for a job is tough, but there are many other moments along the journey, and not just PhD journey, generally your academic journey, where we might feel down, and especially, say, after a journal or a conference rejection. Jenny, would you share any personal tips with us on how to stay resilient on a bad day and keep the focus, and what keeps you going?
Yes, many rejections, especially article rejections. I think my tip is to give yourself space and time to feel those feelings, because rejection is tough. And as much as we might try to tell ourselves not to, that is part of the process, not to take it personally, all right, we have feelings about it. So I tend to first have this real sort of throw the feedback across the room type of reaction, get the rage out, stomp around, go for a walk, moan to a friend on the phone, and not try and deal with the comments on the same day. Sometimes, depending on the comments, not even on the same week. Because I need to, if I try and address those comments and start editing that paper straight away, then I'll be defensive in my reply to the peer reviewers. Whereas if I just give myself time to process first, I end up seeing the helpful side of things, even if it's phrased a little bit unhelpfully, less than constructively. And then I can actually find the bits that will be helpful, and it'll be a better outcome in terms of the revision process as a result. So that's my top tip.
I like how you said defensive. I would just say shout. Keri, would you add anything to it?
I think I would probably cycle through the same emotions as Jenny as well, especially if it's a straight out. I mean, the quickest rejection I've ever gotten is probably a desk reject within the day. So, sometimes you can see it as, oh no, I spent all this time formatting a paper, submitting it, and thinking I can get it off my desk for a while. But really, sometimes it's also a blessing in disguise, because it could be that you quickly move that paper to a different home. I like to think that all of my papers will eventually find a home, and which is true. I think when in the early days, the rejection definitely was more painful and stuck with me a lot longer than it should. But over time, certainly, I would say the feelings go or subside once you get through more rejections, and you definitely build a thicker skin around the whole process as well. So ultimately it will get better. And I would say, yeah, you just have to keep at it and keep trying. I think my longest paper that I try to find a home for was something along the lines of 2.5 years. Many, rejections and whatnot, but each time I think when I got it back, I just think, well, it belongs somewhere. I think it's a useful knowledge for the field, and I will find a home for it. And Alina, how about you?
Agree to every word you said. And after moaning to friends and peers and shouting and screaming and crying and just getting this out of the system, I think it eventually gets easier. And one thing I just remembered what helped, and I can't remember with their account name anymore, but there are plenty of PhD academic memes. Memes do help a lot. I remember visually and vividly seeing this rejection when you're a student, rejection when you're a postdoc, rejection when you're a professor, where the person didn't even blink when they got a rejection. So I thought, like, oh, I hope I'm going to reach this stage at some point where rejection comes. I'm like, next. But yeah, absolutely. I think trying to remember that it's not personal, even though it feels that way, that it's about work, and work does not define the whole of you, is incredibly hard.
Yeah. So I guess the next part is sort of, we're coming to the tricky part of the conversation, which is ChatGPT and AI versus academia. That's one way of putting it, and I'm sure some will agree, some will disagree. Jenny, what's your take on the role of AI in academia and the learning process?
So, to put my cards on the table, I feel like maybe I'm, no, not maybe, definitely, I'm a bit behind the curve on trying out ChatGPT myself. I've heard great things from colleagues who are very active in the sort of new developments in technology arena, who've said that, ChatGPT can be really useful in terms of generating code, streamlining the process. So I feel like I really need to get on that. So I've spent a bit more time thinking about AI in the learning process. And I think in the same vein as sort of it can be useful and streamline things, I think AI can be a useful learning tool. Now, I'm not talking obviously about sort of a student uncritically doing a copy-paste job of, hey, AI, can you write my essay for me? But if it's used alongside sort of critical thinking to streamline the assignment process, so you're using Grammarly to proofread your assignment before submission, or having quite a sort of iterative conversation with a ChatGPT or an AI about suggesting readings or working through an essay outline, I think that could be a powerful learning tool if the student's critically engaging with it. So, going through multiple steps and refining the prompts and sort of checking the text against the assignment description to make sure that they've hit all the criteria and things. Checking that all the references that the AI has suggested actually exist and do support the argument. Yeah, if they're going through all of that, then I think surely learning is taking place, and in which case I'm not entirely averse to it. But I think there are really interesting conversations about academic integrity and use of AI, both in research and in learning in higher education. And I think we need to involve students at all levels, as well as obviously academics at all levels in these conversations. But I'm sure you've thought a lot more about these things than I have so far. So what are your thoughts?
I would say I agree with you. I was a big skeptic about ChatGPT and AI, but I think I'm slowly changing my mind, and I'm convinced that our jobs are not going to go away. I was just I think I could just wanted to recommend that there are some really, really good sources like Connected Papers, for example, that draws you a graph that links different papers that cited each other and that are kind of like key seminal reading. So that's a very good tool when you can use ChatGPT or Claude AI, another good tool to summarize complex concepts or remind you about some certain like what are the welfare concepts and or say what's the new developments. That can be very helpful. However, you need to be careful what you check in. Claude AI also has a cool feature that you can upload a paper and then you can ask it to summarize it. So it doesn't have to look for it up. So it can be your own paper if you need help with like inspiration for discussion, for example. Keri, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, I guess I'm coming at all of this kind of from also a teaching perspective. And I currently supervise this student led group called Education, Innovation, Entrepreneurship at UCL. And there's certainly a lot of excitement around learning about the possibilities and capabilities of AI and ChatGPT in learning and also teaching. I think our students themselves are, many of them, especially the early adopters, are actively trying out the technology. Also, I think creates kind of thinking creatively about how that could be useful for their learning. So I think that itself is quite refreshing and also a good thing that's taking place. In terms of on the other end, as a lecturer, reading essays, I think, and thinking about assessments, that's certainly something we are now trying to think outside the box a little bit more, considering alternative assessments that perhaps ChatGPT and AI won't have a good handle on. And I think students need, we can't expect students to not use this, just like everyone is expected to know how to use Google, for example. It is kind of here, and what we ought to be doing instead is to make students aware of the limitations and also strengths of the technology and see how they can actually use it in a ethical way as well, as part of their learning. So I'm all for that kind of model of learning about the capabilities and applying it in an ethical way for their learning.
Thank you. Agree. Very important for teaching. Well, sadly, our episode is coming to an end now. While preparing for the season, we launched a small survey in our academic networks asking what advice our academic colleagues and friends would give themselves if they could back in time. So let's read a few of them, and the rest you can find in our notes. So, advice number one: publish a paper. Push to publish a paper. Search for a right supervisor who at least able to unleash your potential. That's really strong. Take annual leave like you would do in a job, otherwise, you will burn out. Very good one. Take care of your health, focus on the kind and helpful people, take less time to listen to, and try to understand people who put you down. Useful but not worth the energy.
Tip 4, it's okay to do things again. If the week's writing turned out wonky, drop it in your file of offcuts and start anew. If the first round of funding didn't work out, reapply. If the seminar tanked, then try it with another spin next time. Great advice. Make sure to focus on more than just your research. Try to gain experience with teaching, presenting at conferences, collaborating with others. All of these things are important for your development as an academic and also look great on your CV. You might not realize how much you've progressed during the PhD because it happens gradually and continuously. But if you're learning and developing so much, one day you'll be in the stage and realize how much you progressed throughout your PhD.
So, as I said, we will post all the answers in our show notes for you to read, and I hope you found it useful.
Great. Jenny, we ask all our guests to share their tip of the day. For this episode, we asked you to think about the advice you would have given to your PhD self. What would that be?
I found this one really hard to try and think back what I would say if I met my 2015 self right at the beginning of the journey. So I think after some consideration, I would want to give my past self a bit of a pep talk, just because you had a non-normative route into the PhD doesn't mean that you don't belong in academia. Yes, there are weird unwritten rules and sort of peculiarities that you need to work out, but you don't need to leave your professional past and lived experience out the door. So the tip is tailor a sort of analysis of your own strengths and development needs in order to work out all of the skills that are directly transferable that I've already banked, and then work out what I need to focus on in the sort of terms of the academia specific competencies, so that I can ask my supervisor and other mentors for help specifically with those.
Thank you, Jenny. I hope that this is the advice that you will give to your future PhD students as well. Thank you for a lively discussion.
Thank you for listening to Academia et al. I'm Keri Wong.
And I'm Alina Pellich.
And joining us today was our lovely guest, Jenny Chanfreau. You can learn more about Jenny's research on Jenny's University of Sussex profile, or follow her on X or Twitter at Jen, CHANF, and also on Blue Sky Social, so at Jen, CHANFREAU.BSKY.social.
This season has been brought to you with the support from the Doctoral School Researcher Networks and Academic Societies Fund. And a quick favor before you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd really appreciate it if you could give the IOE podcast a rating. 5 stars would be nice if you're really enjoying the show. And that will also help us to reach more people who would be interested in hearing about us. Thanks for listening.
Academia et al. Is brought to you by the IOE's Early Career Network. This podcast is presented by Dr. Keri Wong and Dr. Alina Pellich. The theme music was created by Ronnie Shu. Amy Leibowitz is the series producer, and Sarah Jane Grigori is the executive producer.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast.